The sky above the battlefield was the color of dried blood, a heavy, clotted red that seemed to sag under the weight of the dying day. Shattered towers of plasteel and ferrocrete pierced the horizon like the broken teeth of some colossal beast, and the ground between them was littered with the detritus of war, crushed exosuits, charred supply drones, the occasional severed cybernetic limb still twitching pitifully in the dust. The air was thick with the burnt metal stench of plasma discharges, spiced with the bittersweet tang of leaking coolant. Kassira moved through the devastation like a phantom. Her steps made no sound. Her armor, a dark, supple weave of living metal, shifted seamlessly with her movements, absorbing the crimson twilight into its folds. Her skin, a smooth canvas of porcelain white, caught the sickly light and reflected it faintly, as if she carried some stubborn memory of cleaner suns. Her long, pointed ears, sensitive as radio antennae, twitched at every distant boom and crackle. She was not in a hurry. There was no need to rush among the dying. The humans called her people the Bloodborne, a name whispered with equal parts fear and fascination. And in their soldiers' barracks, drunk on synthetic whiskey, they told each other wild stories. That the Bloodborne drank the souls of the wounded, that a single drop of their blood could heal mortal wounds or twist you into something monstrous, that they fought not for land or wealth, but out of some ancient, unknowable hunger. Kassira found most of these stories hilarious. If her kind had really been half as terrifying as humans imagine, the war would have been over centuries ago, probably with fewer supply shortages and infinitely better boots. She kicked aside a fallen combat drone, its severed optic cables trailing behind it like the intestines of some mechanical animal, and paused beside a crumpled figure. A human soldier, judging by the crude make of his body armor and the outdated rifle lying uselessly a few feet away. He was face down in the dirt, his uniform torn, blood pooling beneath him in a lazy, reluctant trickle. Kassira tilted her head, studying him. His vitals, scanned automatically by her armor's embedded systems, were faint but stubbornly present. His wounds were bad. Shrapnel lodged deep in his abdomen, bones broken, internal bleeding setting in like a slow, thorough assassin. By all rights, he should have been dead already. "You humans," she murmured aloud, more to herself than to him. "Stubborn as malfunctioning mechs and half as smart." A faint groan escaped the man's lips. Kassira's ears twitched at the sound and she sighed. She could walk away. She should walk away. Interfering would risk everything. Her mission, her anonymity, possibly her life. The council would have her hide strung up in the square if they knew she was wasting resources on a human. And yet, cursing under her breath in her native tongue, a sharp musical sound like broken glass tumbling down a waterfall. She crouched beside him, her fingertip elongated into a fine needle-sharp claw, and she drew a single bead of her own blood. It glowed faintly, pulsing with an internal light, viscous and heavy with power. "This is a terrible idea," she told him, as if he were conscious enough to argue. "You're probably going to grow an extra head, or sprout wings, or start quoting bad poetry. Not my fault." With a deft motion, she touched the blood to his lips. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the man jerked as if an invisible fist had punched him square in the chest. His eyes flew open, vivid green, rimmed with pain and confusion, and he gasped, dragging in a ragged breath. The wounds across his body sealed themselves with unsettling speed, the flesh knitting cleanly, almost too cleanly, as though time itself had simply reversed. He blinked up at her, his gaze glassy and unfocused. "Are you an angel?" Kassira snorted, a sound that did not fit her otherwise ethereal appearance. "If I am, you're in serious trouble." He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back with a grunt. What? "You're alive. Congratulations. Don't expect a trophy," she said dryly, glancing around. Distant engines rumbled, drawing closer. They didn't have long. "Name," she demanded. He squinted at her. Jonas. Jonas Carter, Lieutenant." Kassira rolled her eyes. "Fantastic. I rescued an officer. My luck is as rotten as your sense of self-preservation." He gave a weak chuckle, then winced. "I don't suppose..." You have a medevac stashed somewhere? Maybe a spare shuttle? I have a bad attitude and a healthy fear of bureaucracy, Kassira said, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet with alarming strength for her size. We'll have to make do. The engines grew louder. Low flyers by the sound of them. Too heavy for recon drones. Too fast for transports. Probably a sweeper squad, mopping up survivors. You can walk? She asked, watching him critically. Define walk, Jonas muttered. If you mean stagger in the general direction of not dying, sure. I'll take it, Kassira said, slinging his arm over her shoulders and dragging him toward the relative cover of a toppled hover tank. Her armor's adaptive systems flexed against the added weight, but made no complaint. Jonas looked at her sidelong as they half-hobbled, half-lurched across the field. So, not that I'm ungrateful or anything, but what are you? Medic? Field nurse? Mysterious battlefield goddess? Something far worse, Kassira said, her mouth quirking in a humorless smile. I'm a very bad idea you're going to regret immensely. Jonas laughed. A real laugh this time. Dry and raw. Story of my life. Behind them, searchlights flared across the battlefield, slicing through the bloody dusk. The first low flyer swept overhead, and Jonas caught a glimpse of its insignia. Human but not friendly. Mercenaries, maybe, or worse. He tightened his grip instinctively. You sure about this? He rasped. Kassira's eyes gleamed as she glanced back at the pursuing lights. Number. But it's better than waiting here for a bullet to argue philosophy with your skull. They slipped into the tangled wreckage just as the first plasma shots scorched the air where they had stood seconds before. Huddled behind the burned-out tank, Jonas pressed a hand to his still-healing side and grimaced. Hey, he whispered, if I turn into a blood-sucking monster later, you'll tell me, right? Kassira gave him a wicked grin that showed just the faintest hint of sharp canines. If you do, you'll be the second most annoying one I know. Then, with a flex of her armor and a muttered curse about babysitting half-baked humans, she led him deeper into the maze of ruins. Away from the battlefield, away from everything he thought he knew, and into a future tangled with secrets, survival, and the slow, terrible pull of a bond neither of them had chosen. Somewhere overhead, unnoticed, the first stars began to pierce through the wounded sky. The night had deepened into a kind of bruised purple, lit only by the occasional flicker of distant fires and the sullen glow of orbital debris cutting slow arcs across the sky. Somewhere beyond the broken horizon, the war still raged, plasma cannons vomiting green fire into the clouds, the heavy thud of railguns like the slow heartbeat of a dying world. But here, nestled in the skeletal remains of an abandoned supply depot, there was an uneasy, unnatural calm. Jonas sat with his back against a half-melted cargo container, trying very hard not to think about the fact that he was technically committing treason by merely breathing the same air as his rescuer. His side ached like he'd been stomped by a mech, but the wounds were gone, healed so cleanly it was unsettling. Occasionally, he caught himself poking at the spot just to make sure it hadn't all been a hallucination brought on by blood loss. Across from him, Kassira crouched by a portable field cooker she'd salvaged from a wreck, muttering to herself in her native language. Jonas was almost sure he caught a few words that sounded suspiciously like half-witted monkey blood and why me, universe. So, Jonas said, trying to inject some levity into the crushing silence, is this where you fatten me up before you eat me? Because fair warning, rations have not been kind to my flavor profile. Kassira shot him a look that could have frozen fire. Please, I have standards. Jonas grinned, emboldened by the fact that she hadn't yet hurled a plasma blade at his forehead. You say that now. Wait until you've smelled me after 3 days without a proper shower. Kassira grimaced. I have smelled worse things. Once during a siege on Vecthar 3, our forward camp ran out of decontamination units. We had to live with humans for weeks. I would rather chew glass. Wow, Jonas said, mock-wounded. You really know how to make a guy feel special? She ignored him, fiddling with the field cooker until it finally sputtered to life, releasing a thin, wavering heat signature. Kassira tossed a pair of protein slabs, jury-rigged from whatever the previous owners had left behind. onto the heating plate. The smell that rose was not exactly promising. Jonas wrinkled his nose. Smells like regret. Better than nothing, Kassira said, straight-faced. Or would you prefer to eat your own boots? Jonas glanced down at his mud-caked, half-destroyed boots. Hard pass. The meal was, against all odds, edible. Barely. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Jonas occasionally making dramatic gagging noises, to which Kassira responded with increasing levels of disdain. When the food was gone, and the faint warmth from the cooker had faded, Jonas leaned back, staring up at the sky. Through the ragged gaps in the depot's shattered ceiling, he could see the stars, thousands of them smeared across the darkness like spilled silver dust. You ever think, he said after a long moment, that all this, he waved a hand vaguely toward the distant war, is just insanely stupid? Kassira didn't answer immediately. She was watching the sky too, her long ears twitching subtly as she listened to things Jonas couldn't hear. Finally, she said, stupidity is a universal constant. The method changes, but the outcome is always the same. Jonas chuckled. That's comforting. I aim to inspire, Kassira deadpanned. He smiled, then winced as he shifted. Seriously, though, how did we end up here? Humans and Bloodborne. Fighting over what? A couple of patches of dirt and a few resource nodes? Kassira tilted her head, considering. Fear, she said finally. Your kind fears what it cannot control. And mine. She paused, a wry smile playing at her lips. We are not particularly good at making ourselves less terrifying. Jonas snorted. Understatement of the century. A soft beep interrupted them, Kassira's armor flashing a discreet warning across her forearm display. Jonas squinted at it, catching flashes of alien script and strange symbols. Problem? He asked. Patrols, she said, rising smoothly to her feet. Several. Scanning for survivors and anomalies. Jonas struggled upright, feeling every molecule of exhaustion in his bones. Good news just keeps on coming. You humans have a saying, do you not? Kassira said, her eyes gleaming in the dark. When it rains, it pours. Yeah, we usually say it with more swearing. She smiled, not warmly, but not entirely coldly either, and extended a hand. Jonas hesitated only a moment before taking it. They moved quickly, slipping through the skeletal remains of the depot like shadows. Kassira led the way, her armor adjusting its color and texture to match the surrounding ruins. Jonas did his best to follow without tripping over every piece of debris in his path. They ducked into the collapsed entrance of a service tunnel just as the first patrol passed overhead. A sleek, insectile hovercraft bristling with sensor arrays and weapon pods. Its searchlights swept the ruins, lingering for a terrifying moment on the spot where they had been sitting minutes before. Jonas held his breath, heart hammering so loudly he was sure the patrol would hear it. Beside him, Kassira was unnervingly calm, her expression serene, almost bored. She caught his eye and, with infuriating casualness, mimed relaxed with a flick of her fingers. Jonas resisted the urge to throttle her. When the patrol finally moved on, he exhaled shakily. You enjoy that, don't you? A little, Kassira admitted. You have a twisted sense of fun. She shrugged. Survival is tedious. One must find amusement where one can. They waited a few more minutes, then continued deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of rust and decay. Strange graffiti adorned the walls, faded warnings from another war, another lifetime. As they walked, Jonas asked, So, where exactly are we going? Or are you just leading me in circles until I drop dead? There's a safe house, Kassira said. Old Bloodborne installation, hidden, abandoned, or at least it was the last time anyone checked. Jonas raised an eyebrow. And if it's not abandoned? Kassira flashed him a grin that was all teeth. Then you will get to meet my extended family. They are far less charming than I am. Jonas groaned. Oh, good. Family reunions. Just what I needed to complete the worst week of my life. Ahead, the tunnel forked into darkness, each path yawning like the open maw of some sleeping beast. Kassira paused, scanning the air with her ears, listening for sounds Jonas couldn't hear. Left, she said finally. You sure? He asked. No, she said, already moving. Jonas followed, muttering under his breath. Nothing like blind optimism to really round out the apocalypse. As they plunged into the deeper dark, the world above, the war, the armies, the endless politics, seemed to fall away. Down here it was just two souls stumbling through the forgotten bones of an older world, bound together by accident, blood, and a growing, reluctant trust neither of them quite knew what to do with yet. The safe house wasn't exactly what Jonas had pictured. In his mind, it had been a sleek subterranean facility full of cutting-edge tech and gleaming walls. Maybe even a hidden armory or two. Something dramatic befitting an ancient and terrifying alien species. What he found instead was a damp, creaking bunker cobbled together from rusted metal plates and overgrown with phosphorescent moss that glowed a sickly green. Half the walls looked like they might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. A forgotten console near the entrance emitted a sad little whine every few seconds, as if it, too, were disappointed with itself. Kessira moved through the space with the weary familiarity of someone who had seen too many wars and too many abandoned dreams. She brushed a hand along the cracked control panel, murmuring a few words in her own language. To Jonas's surprise, the panel coughed to life, throwing flickering holograms into the air. Maps, status readouts, ancient alerts about forgotten invasions. "Welcome to luxury accommodations," Jonas said, waving at a moss-covered bench. "5-star rating on rottendwellings.com. Kessira gave him a flat look. "If you are unhappy, I can leave you outside with the patrols." He held up his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'll take moldy alien bunkers over angry death squads any day." They secured the entrance as best they could, which mostly involved jamming a broken mech limb against the door and hoping for the best, and settled into a wary, exhausted truce. Jonas found a relatively clean patch of floor and collapsed onto it, groaning. For a few blessed moments, there was nothing but silence. No pursuit, no gunfire, no existential dread, aside from the usual background hum. "You're remarkably good at not dying," Kessira said at last, breaking the quiet. Jonas chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "It's my third best skill." "Oh," she said, an eyebrow arching. "And the other two?" "Making bad jokes," he said, holding up a finger, "and trusting people I probably shouldn't." Kessira smiled faintly. "A dangerous combination." "Tell me about it," Jonas said, thinking back to all the times that very combination had landed him in a medbay, a jail cell, or a very awkward conversation with a superior officer. But this time felt different. This time, trusting someone dangerous hadn't led him into ruin. It had saved him. "You never told me why you helped me," he said, sitting up and meeting her gaze. "You could have left me there." Kessira looked away, her face unreadable. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, "I was tired." He blinked. "Tired? Tired of watching everything die," she said. "Tired of obeying orders written by creatures who forgot what it means to be alive. Tired of pretending that survival is the same thing as living." Jonas absorbed that, feeling something shift inside him. Something bigger than gratitude, bigger than debt. "You humans," Kessira went on, her voice low, "you are reckless, short-lived, emotional. You leap before you look. You make the worst decisions for the stupidest reasons." She turned back to him, her pale eyes fierce. "But you fight, not just because someone told you to. You fight because you choose to." He smiled a little crookedly. "We're too stubborn to know when to quit." "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps you remember something my kind forgot." They lapsed into silence again, but this time it was companionable, like two weary soldiers sharing a last cigarette before the next battle. When Jonas finally spoke, his voice was lighter. "So, what now? We start a tiny, poorly funded rebellion out of this moldy death trap?" Kessira laughed, a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "Hardly. We survive. We find others. Quietly, carefully. Change begins not with armies," she said, tapping her temple, "but with ideas. And maybe a few badly timed explosions?" Jonas suggested hopefully. Kessira's smile widened. "That too." They spent the next few hours patching up the bunker as best they could. Jonas discovered he had a real talent for coaxing half-dead alien tech back to life, or at least for smacking it until it grudgingly obeyed. Cassira was impressed, though she hid it behind her usual mask of dry sarcasm. When night fell fully, if it could be called night in a world perpetually lit by burning skies, Jonas sat with Cassira at the entrance, watching the stars through the broken hatchway. "You know," he said, nudging her with his shoulder, "you're not as terrifying as I expected." "I can remedy that," Cassira said with mock solemnity. "Give me a few hours." "I'll take my chances," Jonas said, grinning. They fell quiet again, and Jonas realized with a strange pang that he didn't want this moment to end. That in the wreckage of a world gone mad, he had found something rare, a connection forged not by duty or survival alone, but by choice, by trust. He thought back to the man he'd been 3 days ago, scared, desperate, bleeding out in the dirt. That man had seen Cassira as a monster. Now sitting beside her under a fractured sky, he saw something else entirely. A friend, a partner, maybe something even more important. A reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, light could find a way to survive. "Hey," Jonas said, leaning back and looking at the stars. "You think there's still a place out there where we're not enemies?" Cassira followed his gaze, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded, slow and certain. "If there is not," she said, "then we will make one." Jonas smiled. "Good, because I'm terrible at giving up." She reached over and ruffled his hair with a clawed hand, a gesture half annoyed, half affectionate. "Stubborn monkey blood," she said fondly. "Terrifying bat lady," he shot back, grinning. And for the first time in a long while, Jonas felt something stronger than fear, stronger even than hope. He felt alive. The war would rage on. There would be losses, betrayals, battles yet to fight. But for now, in this broken place between worlds, two unlikely allies had chosen something stronger than survival. They had chosen each other. Above them, the first true star, not a satellite, not a burning wreck, but a real, steady light, broke through the smoky heavens. It shone down on them, stubborn and brilliant, and refused to fade.